I thought the funniest thing about last night's call when I called you to just make sure that you're coming is that you called me back on speakerphone with Margot, and then Margot and I just proceeded to have a conversation for 5 minutes bashing you while you were just listening, not saying a word, just totally used to it. Like, I almost forgot that you were in the car listening as Margot and I were just ripping you for like...
And ripping me because you had the assumption that I didn't know I didn't have the game tonight, and that's why I said it was okay to do the podcast.
Yeah, but then Margot had to admit that she had to like tell you that you didn't have the game tonight.
I knew all along I didn't have the game. She just said, "Do you know you don't have the game?" And I said, "Yes, I know I don't have the game." And so that was right before we called you. And then you said, "I just wanted to make sure that you knew you didn't have the game." I'm like, "Yes, I knew I didn't have the game."
Welcome back to Worst Seats in the House. Mike Russo, Anthony LaPanta, coming to you from Tree Rink on the morning of the Wild's first game of a 4-game homestand that includes the Detroit Red Wings and the Florida Panthers coming to town for Hockey Day, Minnesota. A couple cold days on the horizon down for Hockey Day, Minnesota, down in Hastings. The Iowa Wild have a game on Friday. Hopefully, people brave that. And then, obviously, the high school games on Saturday, and then the Wild play the Panthers at 8 p.m. Tonight's game is 8:40 p.m., nationally televised game. So Anthony was nice enough to come down to Tria, even on your day off, Anthony. I called you last night because you agreed to do this podcast here. Then I remembered it was nationally televised, and I called you. I'm like, "You sure you want to come here? It's your day off." But you were nice enough to do it.
Every day is a work day during the hockey season. Every day. So I'll be here at the game anyway to watch, and a lot of prep for Hockey Day Minnesota right now. I've got one of the high school games that I'll be calling on Saturday before the Wild Panther game that night. And, I do anything for Worst Seats in the House.
Absolutely. Don't you think you should be the guest announcer, though, for the minus 25-degree Iowa Wild Milwaukee Admirals game?
I shouldn't, and I'm sure they've got it well covered, but I'll have plenty of cold weather time on Saturday for the Hastings Eastridge game that I've got. And I've also, over the years, I've logged enough of the minus 20 games. I had one up in Baudette. It was pretty close to that cold the year we were in Mankato. It was really cold the year it was in Minneapolis. So I've had my share of outdoor games trying to get the pipes loosened up in sub-zero weather.
Just be careful this time, because I know in Mankato you took a tumble on the ice and hurt yourself. And then, coming back from Baudette, no big deal, you flipped the van.
I won't be riding with Kevin.
Yeah.
And I haven't.
Kevin was behind the wheel.
I have not yet ridden in a car that Kevin is driving since that night, and I won't. Yeah. But I slipped.
You don't have to go through the whole story about the Baudette one, but just remind people what happened. Because when I say you flipped your van, you flipped
we rolled a van. Yeah. We were on our way home late at night, and it was minus 20 something air temp, like minus 50 or 60 wind chill. It was really cold. Mm-hmm. And we hit a snowdrift driving home after the Hockey Day games on that Saturday night. We rolled his van into the ditch, and we
Not
were
even
really.
His. Was it a FanDuel van?
No, it was his. It was his
I didn't
van.
know that.
Yeah. It was his van, and it was scary. We were all fortunate to walk away really uninjured. And the end of the night was getting his van towed all the way from, we were in Black Duck, and we had it towed all the way from Black Duck to Burnsville and rode. I got dropped off in Lino Lakes on the way home, but we rode 4 across in a tow truck for about 5 hours to get home.
Dusty Peterson, the third person in that van besides the tow truck driver.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine.
And the Mankato one was really cold. So I was wearing like a big, heavy jacket, winter pants, had heavy, clunky boots on. And I came out of our TV truck after the first period. I think it was after the first period of the girls' hockey game. I did 2 high school games down there that day before driving back. And the steps were those portable, like, aluminum steps, and I stepped out and my boot just slipped, and it's only about 4 steps, but I was just reaching for the first step and I slipped and landed flat on my back on the steps and lost my wind. And the best part of this story is I walked out to do the second period of the game and I couldn't catch my breath. And plus it was really cold. So it's not easy to call play-by-play when it's that cold because your mouth is frozen, your face is frozen. And there was a goal in the girls' high school game I was calling, and I have no recollection of who scored or anything, but I tried to punch like a goal call, and I couldn't. I had no wind. I couldn't do it. And so I get back. I walk back into the warming house during the second intermission, and I get a text from Margot saying, "You've got to show more emotion during this game." And I texted her back. I said, "Margot, I like lost my wind when I fell during the first intermission. I can't, like, I have no depth. I can't even catch my breath." And it later turned out I had broken 2 ribs on the fall, but I didn't know it yet at the time. I just had my side was so sore. Like when I'd take a deep breath, it hurt. Yeah. I remember I found out like a week later, we were in New York on a road trip. And I went in to see the trainers and the doctors, and they looked and said, "Well, you've got 2 broken ribs. No wonder your side hurts."
I remember the story about. I think that we were in St. Louis when you were in the car accident, the van accident. I think because the Wild were out of town, and because I remember hearing about it on the road. But the most crazy part of that story, if I remember, Anthony, was that you were like leaving a voicemail for Margot right before the accident happened. So she had on the voicemail, was it a voicemail or did she actually pick up? But she heard the entire accident.
Yeah, what happened was I had called her earlier to tell her that we had decided to drive home. The Wild were at home that night, but we were going to be hosting from Badette Bay all night. That was the plan. So we were going to do intermissions from up there and everything. But it was so cold, all of our equipment was freezing. So they said, instead, as soon as it gets dark, we'll have you guys pre-tape all of your wrap-ups and everything from up here so that we can shut everything down. So we originally were going to stay in Badette that night. But because we had pre-taped everything, we said, well, all right, let's just drive home tonight. So we were driving home, and I had called Margot maybe a half hour earlier to say, hey, we decided to drive home. We're on our way. Well, I'd called her from Kevin's phone, and when we crashed, his phone redialed the last number that it had called and called Margot again. So she picks up the phone to hearing the tail end of a truck going boom, 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 and then hearing me saying, Kevin, are you okay? Kevin, are you okay? And I need a phone. Somebody find me a phone, and calling 911 to, hey, we were just in a car accident. So she overheard all of this. I didn't know that she overheard all this. So to fast forward then, as we were standing in the Black Duck tow truck, which was connected to the repair shop, which was connected to the police office. And we're standing there, and I hadn't called home to say, because I had no idea she knew we had been in an accident. Like if I knew she was aware we were in an accident, I would have called her right away to say, well, everybody's okay. But I was just waiting until we had a plan and to then call her back. We didn't know what we were going to do yet. We were trying to figure out how we're going to get home. His van's totaled. How can we make this work? And all of a sudden she called Kevin and left a voicemail on Kevin's phone saying, hey, Kevin, it's Margot. I just had this funny feeling something happened. I hope. And so Kevin plays the voicemail, and he is just white as a ghost as he comes and listen to this voicemail from Margot. And so I called her back, and she's like, why? How could you not call me? And I was like, Margot, how would I have known that you knew we were in an accident? And so I caught a little heat for that.
I like how I told you didn't have to go down the whole story again, and then I led you right down there. The best part of the story, though, is that she overheard you yelling at Dusty, and then she's like, you need to be nicer to Dusty.
That's exactly what she said. And it was because I had found a phone to call 911, and so after I'm on hold with the police department, and I was trying to crawl around to find our jackets and everything, because we were going to be in a car for 5 hours. So we were all just in our sweatshirts. We had taken off our jackets, and I'm crawling around. I said, Dusty, here, when they come back, just tell them. And he said, what am I going to tell them? I said, I don't know what they're going to ask you, Dusty. And said, well, what am I don't. I said, Dusty, I don't know. Just answer whatever they ask you. I gave them our names and licenses and everything, and so I was like, just give me the phone, Dusty. So that was why Margot said, you have got to be nicer to Dusty. And I was like, what were you just listening the whole time? And she said, yes, this phone called me. I overheard the whole thing.
I thought the funniest thing about last night's call when I called you to just make sure that you're coming is that you called me back on speakerphone with Margot, and then Margot and I just proceeded to have a conversation for 5 minutes bashing you while you were just listening, not saying a word, just totally used to it. Like, I almost forgot that you were in the car listening as Margot and I were just ripping you for like...
And ripping me because you had the assumption that I didn't know I didn't have the game tonight, and that's why I said it was okay to do the podcast.
Yeah, but then Margot had to admit that she had to like tell you that you didn't have the game tonight.
I knew all along I didn't have the game. She just said, do you know you don't have the game? And I said, yes, I know I don't have the game. And so that was right before we called you. And then you said, I just wanted to make sure that you knew you didn't have the game. I was like, yes, I knew I didn't have the game.
And then Margaret's like, you see what I have to deal with all the time? I'm like, trust me, I know. This is what I have to deal with all the time. And then
you see what I have to deal with? Just people assuming I have no idea what's happening around me.
Oh, man, it's so funny. All right, our next live show, if you want to hear more of this, is January 26th. That's Monday night at Elsie's in Northeast Minneapolis. Big parking lot, awesome venue. Always cool when we are there. So hopefully everybody comes down on Monday night at 7 p.m. at Elsie's. Anthony, 2-in-1 road trip. Lots to go over from this road trip. Let's start with the good. To me, the most exciting part of the road trip, well, there was so much, it's really a shame the way it ended because it just gives this impression that everything's just going terrible right now. But they have Tarasenko has a huge trip. Kaprizov has 7 assists on the trip, but we'll get to his goal scoring in a little bit because he's got 3 in his last 16. But to me, the most fun, Anthony, was watching Marcus Foligno get the hat trick in front of his dad in Toronto.
Yeah, after he had scored a goal and gotten in a fight in Buffalo in front of his dad. I mean, it was a great trip for him, and I thought it was a little ironic that before the trip started, when we were having our chat with John Hines before the Buffalo game, and I asked him I said, who, as you have to start this road trip without your entire top line, the Eriksson, Boldy, and Johansson line, without Brodin, like, what do you have to have success? And the first 3 players out of his mouth were Hartman, Foligno, Tarasenko. Mm-hmm. And then Foligno has the goal in a fight in Buffalo, the hat trick. Hartman continues to score as he cashed in on the power play where he's filling in for Eriksson. And then Tarasenko has a great trip, and with back-to-back multi-goal games for the first time in 4 years. And I just thought it was somewhat prophetic that these are the guys, and it might sound obvious, but there were some other guys you could have said, like, hey, we're going to need the 4th line to do something. But those were the first 3 guys you mentioned, and then all 3 of them. And part of its role, you've got Hartman and Tarasenko both jumping in on the number 1 power play, taking the spots of Eriksson and Boldy. But a big part of it, too, is I think those guys embraced the challenge of increased opportunity, increased ice time, increased role, and all of them had a great trip and were a part of what you'd have to say is a successful trip. They went to face 3 teams that were all playing on top of their game. Toronto had won 7 in a row at home. Buffalo was 15-2. Montreal's been on a roll for about a month. And yet you won 2 out of 3 without 5 regulars in your lineup.
Yeah, very. As you mentioned, I mean, it almost felt like John challenged those guys because John admitted in Montreal before the game that he sat down with Tarasenko before this trip to talk about his game. And, again, when you're now have Boldy, Johansson, and Eriksson and the entire line, you need these guys to step up. What's a shame about the injuries right now, because it's not, they had 2 impressive games, obviously, in Buffalo and Toronto, but it's not sustainable long term when you're missing your entire second line, who I think you and I both would agree has been their best line, and then Brodin and Bogosian for long term. And what's a shame is that if you look at those last shifts in Montreal, there's a lot of guys that would not been on the ice on those shifts where they were pretty much on their heels. But that winning goal shift by Cole Caulfield, Anthony. I mean, they've got to be better. Nico Sturm loses a draw, then doesn't make a good play on the flip out about 20 seconds before the goal. Brock Faber gets caught looking at the Jumbotron center ice scoreboard to see the time left, which almost just shows you how much this team was just hoping to get to overtime. And then in that little span, he doesn't close on Caulfield because he kind of loses him there. And by the way, when I was thinking that, Anthony, is wait till Brock Faber sees the rink in Milan, because right now, at least if they don't change that Jumbotron, it is on the ceiling. Like he'd have to look way up. And I don't think there's end zone clocks in Milan. So it's going to be really fascinating seeing these guys try to figure out the time left. But that was obviously an instinct where you're going to have Eriksson Ek on the ice. You're going to have Brodin on the ice. You're going to have Johansson probably on the ice. Boldy, it's clearly...
there's no question there were spots. And there were spots in the Toronto game that were the same. In the Buffalo game where these were situations where you probably would have other guys on the ice. But there were also some pretty good moments for those guys. We were just talking about it before we started today. Like Nico Sturm won 9 out of 10 draws in Toronto when the Wild are going up against the best faceoff team in the NHL. And that allowed them to be close to 50-50 in that game. I think they lost the faceoff battle 29-25. But if you take away Sturm, it's 28-16 against every other center. Urov and Hartman were just dominated on the faceoff dots. And so there were some times where those guys stepped up and made big plays, but I felt like down the stretch in the Montreal game that, Montreal was so much the better team in the first period. Minnesota's game in the second and third had been good, but I really felt like about the last 4 minutes of that game that the Wild were running on fumes. Remember, it was their third game in 4 nights, their fourth and sixth in 4 cities, second of back-to-backs. Montreal was rested. The Wild were shorthanded. There were a lot of reasons. The heavy minutes that have been played by Hughes and Faber throughout the last 2 games of the trip. There were a lot of reasons why they looked like they were running on fumes, and I think they were. They were trying to get that game into overtime. They had gotten the tying goal with 7 minutes left, I think, and that's what they've done so well all season, is in those tight games, they've found a way to at least get to overtime. They had only lost one goal game in regulation all year. Over the last 2 seasons, they had only lost 6. They had the 4th best record in 1 goal games in the NHL over the last 2 years. Those are the spots they have. They've always found a way to get that game into the extra session. And this was one of the rare situations where they didn't. And it's a killer. You give up that goal in 15 seconds, that's a point in the standings. That's the difference of right now being even with Dallas or a point behind. And it won't surprise me at all if it comes down to the last week of the season and those teams are separated by a point or 2. And Dallas has had some games like that too, where they've lost some 1-goal games in regulation, but it's what Minnesota has avoided. And that's why maybe it stands out as much as it did, is because it was an exception rather than the rule for this club.
And because they banked so many points, obviously it doesn't feel like a backbreaking, devastating thing, but obviously they don't have time to, feel sorry for themselves because they have no rest coming up. They do get a couple days off Sunday, Monday before I think they play Tuesday, but you come home, you're playing Detroit tonight, you come day off playing Florida. Obviously now you got to take advantage of Detroit tonight. Detroit was in Toronto last night, not an easy back-to-back, got to clear customs, all that type of stuff. They do get the benefit of 2.5 hours later than the start times, unlike the Wild
playing an hour with travel, so that it's about as easy a back-to-back crossing the border as you can possibly have, but it is still the second of back-to-backs.
Yeah, absolutely. And Detroit's a team that the Wild have had some interesting games with, to say the least, the last couple of years. That huge comeback in Detroit last year being the one of the most memorable ones, where Eriksson Ek made such a huge play, and then we don't see him again for a couple months. Anthony, Cole Caulfield and Lane Hutson both had big games in Montreal. Naturally, the Montreal Canadiens tweeted out a tagged USA Hockey with the highlight of the game-winning goal, clear trolling of Bill Guerin. Cole Caulfield, to his credit, and Lane Hutson didn't bite on anything after the game in terms, they didn't throw some shade at them, but obviously they both had to feel good about that.
Yeah, and I mean, it isn't the first time. It's not going to be the last time.
Yeah.
The guys that feel they were snubbed are going to have a little bit of a it's kind of like a player that's been traded. I mean, it's human nature to have a little extra. You don't think we're going to see that from Jason Robertson? I mean, you don't think we saw it last year from Paige Thompson, for Clayton Keller? I mean, you name it, there have been guys. And that's part of what you do when you're in that spot, as Bill Guerin is. And we've talked about this a lot, where if you're just looking at it in terms of how it affects the Wild, there's a plus to it as well, because Billy is allowed to be in contact with so many of these players, develops relationships with these players that do make the team. John Hines gets a chance to work with these players, get to know these players, coach these players. That, to me, by far outweighs the trade-off for, yes, there's going to be a few guys who maybe have a little extra fire the night you play them because they're the guys with whom you had to make the tough decision and the tough call to say you didn't make it.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Let's go back to the Buffalo game. Zuccarello gets the winning goal. I thought it was hilarious. Zuki is so funny. I've never met a player that only wants to talk after losses. He does not talk after wins. So after that game, he made a deal with me. He's like, I'll either not talk tonight, or if I talk to you tonight, I'm only going to start talking after overtime winning goals at high score. I'm like, how about you just let me ask one question? So he let me ask one question and then going on. But it's just even the loss against Winnipeg, I thought it was a great leadership thing. A couple people were critical of it that Wally didn't talk after that game. But I thought it was pretty interesting that he went over to the board, erased Wallstedt's number, and put his number. We didn't ask for him that night. He's like, I'm not going to make the Wallstedt deal have to face the music tonight after being chased. I'm going to talk after it. I thought that was pretty good move by him.
He's done that for the last couple of years. Yeah. And in those spots where it's been the nights where somebody had to stand up and answer the questions, he's always been the guy. And it's a big part of his leadership. There's no doubt.
Yep, absolutely. Gus, that pass that he made in overtime too. How cool is that? I mean, just the awareness that you're going to catch these tired killers going off on a change. And Kaprizov and Zuccarello clearly knew it was going to happen.
That was a great play.
Yeah.
And Gus also on this trip labeled himself that he's a goal scorer, not a fighter. So he's got a little eye for offense. But there's been a lot of talk about how well Wallstedt plays the puck. Gus is an underrated puck handling goaltender. I think he does a pretty good job in those spots. He's made several plays in his last few starts that have really helped the Wild on just simple breakout plays too. So I think it was a great play, led directly to the winner, and a cool moment for Gus.
Yeah, absolutely. That game, the referee, Jordan Samuels Thomas is his name. He had a couple. I mean, it was pretty interesting because I think a lot of times when you talk to players or coaches, they just want you set the standard early and then stick with it the entire game. So early in the game, he started calling little hooks. And maybe they were a little soft, maybe they were a little cheesy, but you got to admit, he kept it up the entire game. So then, after the hold on Yurov and then they scored, John lost his mind on it. But I will say, Samuels Thomas kept it up and calls that late call at the end of regulation and gives the Wild the overtime power play.
Yeah, and that was one he had to call. The only one he missed was the most egregious, the tackle of Quinn Hughes that led to the...
And when we say he, it's really they, because it's him and Kelly Sutherland that game. They're two refs.
But that was the one that what was interesting about it is the play at the end of the game had to be called because it led to a rush the other way.
Right.
So you couldn't wait to see, well, what if they scored? And they only gained puck possession because of the hook on Yurov. And so you had to call it.
Was it Yurov or Tarasenko? That was Tarasenko.
Might have been Tarasenko, but it was the hook came on. That's what led to the possession going the other direction. So you had to call it.
Yeah.
You absolutely had to call it because you couldn't wait to see, well, if he scores, now I'll go back and call the penalty.
Yeah.
But that was the same thing that they had let go on the play where Hughes got tackled because he got tackled, got hit a couple times behind the play. Not only did they not call it, they let the play go on. There's a fight happening behind the play because Foligno's so angered about what was going on against Hughes that some of the Wild players said that they thought the game had stopped because the guys were fighting behind the play and the puck winds up in the net.
Yeah.
So that was a perfect example of what happens if you don't make that call. it leads to a possession change, which leads to a scoring chance. And as an official, you have no way of knowing that this scoring chance isn't going to lead to the winning goal.
Yeah.
I have to make the call. And it's actually, to his credit, it's one of the things that drives me bonkers. And I can't stand when I hear analysts or people say, like, well, I like that the officials let them play, so they don't decide, let the players decide it. By definition, you're not letting the players decide it the other way if you don't call the penalties.
Yeah.
By saying that, we're going to let the players decide it, what does that mean? You turn it into jungle rules and anything goes? No, I mean, a hook is a hook, and I don't care if it's in the first minute or the last minute. And that play in Buffalo is a perfect example, because if they let that hook go with the mindset being we're going to let the players decide it, let's say Buffalo gets possession and that puck winds up in the net, which it might have if the play continues. They now have the puck. They're on the rush. Would you be saying, well, it's a good thing we let the players decide it by letting the guy get away with a hook that created a possession change that led to the goal?
Right.
No, it was an illegal play that gave Buffalo the puck. It had to be called. It was called, and Minnesota wound up winning the game because the right call was made.
Yep, I agree. And then, look, they got some benefits in Montreal. I mean, the one where the
Foligno fell.
Yeah, that was hilarious. I mean, I actually felt bad for the referee, because I actually saw the referee in the concierge lounge at the Marriott yesterday morning, and he looked like a puppy dog that had been kicked, because he saw that I'm sure that went viral online, right. But it was not a good call. And
every official is going to miss calls. Yeah. But I think the difference for me with that one is I would be able to live with it more as an official if I missed that one than if it's a guy taking a blatant dive that made me look bad. Yeah. Foligno just fell. Yeah. He wasn't trying to draw a penalty.
And the reason
he just fell.
Yeah, I think it was called too, is the sound of it made it sound, I think because he tripped over his own skates, it sounded like a stick.
Like a stick hit him, right? Where if I went back, and those officials, as you and I spent another day in the Situation Room on this trip, which was great and always great for insight and behind the scenes. And every time we walk away from either there or the player safety department, and you walk away feeling even more convinced, than as I always have been, that these guys work so hard to try to be great, to try to be perfect, to be good at their jobs. It doesn't mean they don't make mistakes, and it doesn't mean that there aren't nights where calls impact the outcome or missed calls impact the outcome of a game. But they see every clip. They see that one. And to me, if I was an official, and I haven't ever asked officials about this, that one wouldn't bother me, because I'd say, look, it was an awkward play. Yes, it would bother me. I got it wrong, but it was an understandable miss. The ones that would drive me crazy, that would make me the most angry, would be the ones where I fell for a guy diving, because that would stick in the back of my mind, where I'd be like, that guy made me look bad and we watched it in the Situation Room that day. Brady Tkachuk flopped in front of the net, and now luckily for him, Danault flopped as well on the other side, or not Danault, I can't remember who the player was on the other side, but he flopped too, and they both wound up in the penalty box. And I was like, if I had gone back and watched that, I would have been angry. I would have been like, how did I fall for that guy flopping? Yeah. And that would stick with me for a long time.
I saw on X the other day a couple of the Dallas writers referring to Glenn Gulleson bemoaning the fact that Dallas can't buy a call this year. And I'm like, I was thinking to myself, you know what? It's probably caught up to them while they're diving. Right. Because refs, I think, are not giving them the benefit of the doubt. When we come back on Worst Seats in the House, I do want to talk to you more about our time in the Situation Room. And then we have a bunch of questions from X as well. We'll be right back on Worst Seats in the House. I'm excited to start 2026, but we've already had this weather that's just all over the map this winter. Bitter cold, blizzards, but we love it. That's why we live in Minnesota. But with this Minnesota winter we're having, I'm hoping you are not relying on that, not so reliable furnace. Here's the fix for 2026 if you are. If your furnace just needs a little New Year's motivation, Aquarius Home Services has you covered with $98 off any furnace repair. And if it's time to finally say goodbye and good riddance to that old unreliable furnace, well, now's the perfect time to upgrade. From Aquarius right now, Enjoy no payments and no interest for 6 months on a new high-efficiency whole home heating and cooling system. That's right. Enjoy today and don't pay until the summer. You've heard it from me for years about Aquarius Home Services. Trust me, I wouldn't recommend them if I didn't absolutely believe in them and love them. They have helped me be worry-free through all seasons and all situations. They do it all: heating and cooling, electrical, plumbing, drains, and of course, water treatment with their unmatched Connecticut water treatment system, which I have had for years in my home. Whether it's a furnace repair or full upgrade, Aquarius is the place I recommend. Schedule your appointment today at AquariusHomeservices.com. Financing based on credit approval. Aquarius, earning the right to be recommended and keeping your warm cozy and warm all winter long. And don't forget to mention Russo sent you.
Deer hunting season is here, and it's time to own your odds with OnX Hunt, the GPS hunting app trusted by millions of hunters. With the Hunt app, you'll have access to nationwide public and private land ownership information, waypoints, tracks, and much more, all at your fingertips. Go to onxmaps.com/hunt. That's onxmaps.com/hunt to sign up today.
Back here, worst seats in the house, Mike Russo, Auntie LaPanta. Next live show is Monday night at Elsie's. That's January 26th, 7 p.m. And then I'm heading to the Olympics next Monday. So we're going to be doing a bunch of shows remotely during February. Maybe we can even do a live show where Anthony is out there with Gorgie or something. We were in the situation.
I'm very busy during the Olympic break.
Yeah, I know. We were in the Situation Room the other night, and there's so much to talk about that. It was kind of cool. We got to see a 5-minute major actually rescinded. So we were watching a game between Ottawa and Detroit. Riley Gregg chicken-winged Lucas Raymond. They thought it was a headshot. They called a major. It was to review. But one thing that was so obvious being behind the scenes is that, to your point on before, these guys see everything. When anything, whether it's a goal or not, every close play at the line, they're reviewing before they even know what happens. So these guys are prepared if there could be a review. So on that play, Rob Schick, who was the retired referee on duty in the Situation Room that night, immediately went up to Tyler, who was logging that game, and they started watching it before even, coincidentally, Jordan Samuels Thomas, who was the day after the Wild were in Buffalo, he was doing that game, and they go and review it, and right away they see that it was a chicken wing on the chest. And so they change it down to a 2-minute minor on interference. So we got to see that behind the scenes. But the one thing that's so obvious every time we're there is just how on top of the ball they are, and how, like, I know fans, they love to say, like, oh, they hate the Wild, they hate the Rangers, they hate the Leafs. These guys are not even paying attention to really who's playing. They're going through every facet of every game while it's going on live. And they're professionals. They
are, and they, as the point I made before, is they're just determined to try to be as close to perfect as they can be. And yeah, as soon as a play happens, puck enters the zone, they're rolling it back. And that's why these review processes, I know sometimes people will complain about how long they take. Most of the time, they've already started looking at it long before. And for offside, I mean, that has to be a coach's challenge. But they're looking at it long before that and at least have their first instinct. Sometimes they might already know what the right decision is going to be. And but same thing with a puck going in the net. And they're not even waiting. If play is continuing, they're already going back and looking at it like, boy, that was close. Go back and take a look at it. Yeah. And sure enough, they'll find it. And that's why those reviews are as efficient as they are. But they always have a retired ref there every night. So the guys that are on the ice know that it's somebody up there who's been in their spot, who knows exactly what they're looking for. And they have a conversation about what's the best call on the play. And that's what they try to make in each spot.
Yeah, it was good seeing Rob Schick again. One of the great refs of my era of being a fan and covering in the early days of covering the league. He looked much younger without the stash, his famed stash that he used to have on the ice as well. The other cool part of it, and they always have one or two of the Veeps in there, whether it's Kay Whitmore or Ken King, or Dave King, excuse me, or Rod Posma, who's with us that night because we were there on a light day where they only had 3 games. But what is so funny is that Coley Campbell is the head of that room. but he watches from home, and he's got a microphone in his house, and he could see everything that's going on in this room. And all of a sudden, he'll just chime in. It's like the voice of God. And so you and I sat in there for 3 hours just having a conversation with Coley like we were on the phone. And every now and then you forget that he's even there because he'll just go silent for a little bit, and then he'll just start talking again. And I actually felt bad for everybody in the room that night because Coley and I went down memory lane of our entire history knowing each other, from the, mid-90s of covering Florida. He was coaching the Rangers when they were playing the Panthers in the playoffs, and we were talking about those old series. And I covered his son Gregory in Florida too. So you guys all had to roll your eyes as he and I were just talking like for 3 hours about old stories.
Yeah, a little. I just love hearing his opinion on things.
Yeah.
And he has like an eye in the sky, so he can see the whole room. And there were a couple times where they're looking and they're saying, no, watch this monitor. This one's got the look at it. And he's looking at the same thing that the officials are going to look at. And those are the kind of guys that are so committed to this, that they aren't just guys that are riding off into the sunset and letting others do the work. Nope, he's every single night sitting there and watching from home, watching every replay, watching every angle, and I think that's why everything works as efficiently as it does. They have great people there. They all are good hockey people. They all have hockey in their background. That allows them to have an idea of what they're looking for, what they're trying to see, what is likely to be, what's likely going on that a casual person that doesn't have that kind of hockey in their background might miss. And I think it's really it's remarkable how good they are at what they do.
Yeah. Now, again, this is the Situation Room, so this is goal reviews, things like that, penalty reviews. Department of Player Safety in New York, they're the ones that are determining sanctions against players, fines, things like that. But I will say this, there was a couple instances during the game that we were there for where Coley's like, hey, can you go back? I want to just see that penalty. I just want to, was it a good call? And he just would determine, that's not a good call. That he's not ending it there. He's probably sending a little note to Stephen Walcom or things like that. So they're also not sitting there saying everything that our referees do are perfect.
Oh, right. Absolutely. Well, the guy who's in charge of each game goes through and charts everything, flags, marks, every single point. And we had learned the same thing at the Department of Player Safety.
They do it too, yeah.
They have it every hit, every potential penalty call, every call that they think could have been called that wasn't. Yeah. And I remember those guys saying, we want to see it so that before a general manager calls us in the morning, we've already seen every single play that he might be questioning. And here these officials get a report from every single game. Here are the 4 penalties you called. We thought this one maybe shouldn't have been. Here are 4 that could have been called that you let go. And, they get a report and a video clip of every single play that could even be remotely questioned.
And it's color coded and everything. So Stephen Walcom sees this, you can go right and look at it. And, so again, I know all of us, even those that want perfection or, our critics also, we all think, this should have been, it is being looked at. Now, where it goes from there, obviously it's not as public. But, if you ask Stephen Walcom and you ask these referees, they get these reports on a daily basis. And that's why I kind of mentioned before the break too, about what's going on with Dallas right now, is I think that stuff catches up to you. I think that's how you stop diving in the NHL. Is you just, it might be a penalty, but sorry, Mason Marchment, you don't get the benefit of the doubt.
Right. Well, that's what I've always wondered why it takes so long for that to happen. I'll go back to what I said. If I was an official, that's the thing that would drive me the craziest. Mm-hmm. And it's probably not right because you're still trying to call the game, and Mason Marchment still does get tripped from time to time. Mm-hmm. But if there was ever a doubt in my mind, did I see it or did I not? It wouldn't take very many times of being victimized by a guy diving before I'd be like, look, I'm not sure I saw it that way. So the benefit of the doubt is not going his way.
One thing that happened in the Toronto game the other day, I don't know if you noticed, Jody Shelley picked up on it on the Prime broadcast, but before one of the Foligno goals, Lawton started basically playing games, something's wrong with my stick. And he kind of lollygagged. They were out there for a long time. He lollygags to the bench. They to get a new stick. And Jody Shelley immediately notices that the that the equipment trainer took the stick and put it right back on the rack because it was not broken. Then he gets this new stick and he starts playing with it. He's going back to take the draw, and then Yurov smokes him on the draw anyway, and they score the goal. It was hilarious. All the theatrics of Scott Lawton pretending that he needed a new stick for this face-off, and then he comes back and just gets smoked anyway.
Yeah, it was the only I didn't see the part about the equipment guy putting it back on the rack, but I was a little bit surprised that they didn't issue a preemptive first warning against Lawton on the play. And I had asked Louis about that just because I said, these delay tactics like this, when it's obvious that's what they're doing, sometimes you'll see the linesman just say, that's it, that's your warning, or you're kicked out if it's not an icing situation. And there they didn't, and I was a little bit surprised. So I guess it was justice was served by Yurov winning the draw.
It's just funny. And that was a night where it's funny because Yurov, I think he was 6 for 17 in the circle that night, but if you actually look back, he won some huge draws that led to 2 goals.
He won a couple big offensive zone ones for sure. But and Lawton, for all Toronto's success on faceoff dots, Lawton is their best in terms of percentage. They had 3 of the top 9 in the NHL in terms of faceoff win percentage. And that night, he was good, but a couple key spots he got beat. And, that's what faceoffs are the argument has diminished a little bit over the years about the fact that let's ignore it, faceoffs don't matter. They do. There's so many. Look at how many times the Wild have scored on offensive zone faceoff plays, how many goals they've given up right off draws. They are significant moments in the game. And yes, over the course of a game, whether you're 40% or 45% might seem like a small thing, but it's amazing how many times a clean face-off win or clean face-off loss leads directly to a goal.
Yeah, absolutely. What's going on with Kaprizov right now? He's got 7 assists on the road trip, which is obviously great. It means he's creating. But, man, 3 goals in his last 16, 1 in his last 9. And I could tell you, John Hines, I asked him about it the other day, and he kind of poo-pooed it. But he's, as we know, is not ripping anybody publicly. That's his deal, whether it's Kaprizov or Ben Jones. It doesn't matter, right? I mean, that's his way, and I respect that. But I can tell you, inside the organization, Anthony, from people I talk to, there's concern from both management and the coaches about the way that Kirill's played for a lot of this year. He's got the goals, he's got points, even strength though. He hasn't been great. It just doesn't feel like he's dominating games from a goal scoring perspective. What's your take?
Yeah, I don't think he's dominating games. I agree with that. Lou and I were talking about this, I think, during an intermission of the game in Montreal. And sometimes you get guys like him that it becomes more about what he isn't doing as opposed to what he is doing. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's a little bit of that. I mean, this is a guy, he's still in the top 10 in the league in scoring.
Right. He's
in the top 10 in the league in goal scoring. So it isn't like we're talking like a guy who's got 10 goals and 30 points.
Right.
I mean, he's still, think of all the players in the league that would kill to have those numbers. Mm-hmm. Think of all the coaches in the league that would kill to have their top guy be in those spots. And I think that and then the other part of it is that, and I got to be careful to make sure I say this the right way because I think that it shouldn't be overlooked that he and Matt Zuccarello aren't playing with their normal top line centermen since the Marco Rossi trade. Danila Yurov has been that guy, and I know people are going to look and say, well, look at what Rossi's done since he's left. I get all that.
He's been hurt.
But also
played this calendar year.
But remember what he did when he was with those guys last year. You're talking about a 60-point centerman. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that can be overlooked. This doesn't mean that I'm saying that the Wild need to go back and undo the trade or anything like that, or that I'm an anti-Danila Yurov. I think he's going to be a really good player. But right now, he's not as offensively gifted as Marco Rossi was last year. You took away a guy who, as a center, had 60 points with these guys. And I think that has an impact on the production for Kaprizov and Zuccarello. Mm-hmm. So I think there's some factors there.
I think it's just fascinating, though, that everybody on the team's improved offensively since Quinn Hughes has been here, except for him. Like it is. I mean, it's just kind of funny. Like
those numbers haven't really gone down.
But I'm just saying, 3 goals in 16 games. Yeah. That is like you'd think that with Quinn here that he'd be just lighting it up.
But now that's what I'm saying is the whole time Quinn's been here, they haven't had a true playmaking, offensive-minded center with them, and maybe they just need that guy.
Yeah,
and
the one thing about Rossi is he is a puck transporter.
Right.
He's a great supporter. Actual supporter in the zone.
And he was a distributor.
Yeah.
He got the puck to those guys in spot. Now, Yurov, I think, his game has improved. There's no question. And he's going to be he is a good NHL player. He's going to be a really good player. But he doesn't have the same skill set as Marco Rossi, and he doesn't have the same offensive prowess right now that Rossi had. So, I think that's a contributing factor to Kaprizov's diminished goal scoring.
Yeah.
But Hughes was a guy that has made everybody offensively better, but his arrival coincided with Rossi's departure, obviously, and so that meant that from the time he's been here, those guys haven't been playing with an offensive-minded centerman like they were.
I just walked out to the rink because the music's on out there, and it's just Andy Ness doing laps, so it's like a figure skater.
Get himself
exactly. So we'll see which the injured players are about to go on the ice. We'll get that scoop for you in a little bit. Anthony, on that point, this is why Joe and I have been reporting on a constant basis the last couple of weeks that they are going after a center. There is just no doubt about it because Billy sees exactly what you just see. Now, look, he needed Marco Rossi to make the Quinn Hughes trade. But he also knew that he was creating a bit of a hole there on a team that especially with Eriksson Ek out, this hurts. So now the question is, what's coming next? And we have a lot of Twitter questions on this. There's not a lot of number one centers just growing on trees out there. I think that the Wild are looking at guys like Kotkaniemi. He is totally out of favor in Carolina. They feel, I believe, with his size and skating ability, that if he gets more playing time, that he could play. But is he a true number one center? I don't think so. There's Vincent Trocheck. The only thing I've pushed back about, like I've gotten people that, the one thing I've reported consistently is that that Trocheck would make sense here and the Wild will have interest. They just, as of last week, the only thing I was pushing back on is that all these aggregators that essentially took that and basically started saying that the Wild have offered this or they're asking for this. That wasn't true. The Wild at that point, at least, maybe it's changed, had not talked to the Rangers about Trocheck. JT Miller's another guy I could see the Wild having interest in. JT Miller, though, is somebody that the Rangers gave up, traded a lot of significant assets to Vancouver. So I don't think you're just trading your captain and getting nothing back. The issue that the Wild have right now, there's O'Reilly, there's Robert Thomas, those could be pipe dreams. Crosby and Malkin are people that the Wild will absolutely, if they ever were going to move them, would have 100% interest in, but they keep on winning and are flirting with a playoff spot. And I think that if they're in that type of position, I don't see either bailing. But Pinto is somebody in Ottawa that people have asked about. I think the biggest thing here is what the Wild give up, because they've traded a lot of assets, Anthony. When you trade 4 equivalent first-round picks in the Rossi deal, in the Hughes deal, and you trade the first, second, third, and fourth in the Jurczyk deal, the question is, what do you give up? And I think for the right player, we have reported that I think they would consider Jesper Wallstedt. The question is that right player out there?
Yeah, and I have no idea. I don't. All those players that you mentioned are all players that I think would be intriguing, but I don't know that any of them are what you'd call a perfect fit for what this team needs. And that's so I don't even I hate speculating on trades. You know that, because I don't know exactly what other team. I haven't studied the market enough to know, okay, well, if you wanted to try to get this player, here's what everybody else in the league is willing to give. The one part that I think you can easily analyze is the Wild are dealing with a limited number of trade chips, so to speak, because of some of all the deals they've already made. So if you start to look at your roster and you say, well, what are the remaining trade chips you have? The 2027 first round pick and guys like Volstead or Yurov are probably the next best things. And I don't think they're in a hurry to trade either one of those. I don't think they're pushing to trade either one of those guys, but Billy's also made it clear that for the right deal, anybody's on the table.
Yeah. I think Yurov is actually less expendable than Wallstedt, just because Gustafsson has signed for 5 more years. And Wally's probably the type of chip that can get you some sort of top center in some capacity. The question is, you have to weigh it. I sure hope they're not trading a 22, 23-year-old goalie for a 40-year-old, 39-year-old Evgeny Malkin.
Yeah, I don't think they would do that. But
even a Yurov, are you going to trade a 22-year-old center for a 32-year-old center for Trocheck?
I think it would. All of it depends on term on those deals. I mean, you'd have to. To me, it would have to be more than a rental. You'd have to be a guy who has a couple of years left at least. I think if you trade Volstead, in all likelihood, there has to be either in that deal or some subsequent deal, another goaltender coming back. Yeah. So there's a lot of stuff there in play, and I don't doubt for a minute that Billy's been very active, because the one thing I think is obvious is that if you watch this team right now, with the addition of Quinn Hughes, their position as a legit contender changed. It became much more real. But I also think you look at it and see that, well, as real as you are as a contender, to become the one of the, say, 3 teams to beat in the West, you're a top 6 forward, likely a center short. Mm-hmm. And just when you start to compare your lineup against Dallas and Colorado, you're going to have to get through in the first round or 2 of the playoffs. I think you need another guy there that Yurov 3 years from now might be a totally different conversation, where maybe you look at it and say,
I get it. Like, we can't just constantly punt it down the road and say that's a risk, that's a risk, that's a risk. But man, if you're going to trade those assets, you better freaking be right, because you could be the best team in the world going into the playoffs, but you still got, as you just mentioned, have to beat Dallas and Colorado. And that's why it's just like you're mortgaging so much of the future here.
You are, but if you're in a position where you have a chance to win, then I think you got to roll the dice in those spots. And the Wild already have, with the addition of Quinn Hughes. They've rolled the dice. They've said, this is our time, this year, next year, at the very least. So that's why I was saying that if I was going to trade one of those major trade chips, and I hate throwing those guys' names out because it makes it sound like I have no idea if they've been discussed. Maybe you know for a fact they have. If I was in a spot where I had to look at it and say, my 3 main trade chips are Volstead, Yurov, and the 2027 number 1, to me, would not be willing to give one of those guys for a rental, meaning a player that's an expired contract at the end of this season. I'd want at least the following year to say, in this 2-year window, we're going to really make a run, because part of it is having Dallas and Colorado staring at you in the first 2 rounds. The other part is that a 1-year window is really short, because you could be the best team in the league. And if the wrong guy gets injured, the bad bounce 100%. Of the puck happens, a bad call here or there or whatever, it goes wrong, that can end a playoff run immediately. And so, but if I knew I got 2 years, that one of those 2 years to see if all that stuff goes my way.
And guys like Trocheck have term, Miller has term, Pinto has term, Thomas has term.
Yeah, and Miller, I know Miller's numbers are way down this year, and
Miller might be the guy that they like the best, actually.
I mean, he had 100 points 2 years ago. And now I don't think he's 100. He doesn't look like a 100-point guy.
But negative aura, though, that follows him around this league.
I agree. And so I'd have some hesitation.
But Billy knows him better than us.
He does, and
he loves him.
And so do some of the players in our room. And I think it's so I'd be intrigued by him. I have no idea what the cost would be, but I also think that we've talked so much about the way this team has played for each other, that to bring in a guy that is that is kind of a lightning rod type guy is risky because you don't know how that might disrupt others. As I wrote the other day in
our Insider, before Billy does that, he better sit down with Quinn Hughes and find out everything that happened in Vancouver, because he would know. So that's just the way they feel. Let's take some Twitter questions. By the way, it is Matt Boldy on the ice with Andy Ness, so that's good news. And I do believe that we'll at least see Bogosian and Eriksson Ek during the skates. We'll see if they can play tonight against the Red Wings, but those seem to be the closest to guys coming back. Boldy cannot play against Detroit. He's not eligible to come off IR until Friday. KCL89 asks, when do you see Billy Guerin starting to push to make a move before or after the playoffs? Olympics, I mean. I think it's just whenever anything pops into the right move. They just wrapped up in Arizona their scouting meetings, so now they've sort of set the plan, for lack of a better term. And but then, if it were me, if it's an Olympian, I'd want to wait. The other thing is you want to ascertain your health coming out of the Olympics with the Wild having so many players left in the Olympics, as we just talked about. Brodin, or we haven't talked about yet, Brodin is going to miss the Olympics, as I reported the other day. He's right now, the timeline is 6 to 8 weeks. I'm a little concerned that it's actually longer, just things that I'm hearing, but we'll see. But I don't think he's got a set, like if the right player became available now, he's going to pounce. He's not just going to wait until after the Olympics or closer to the deadline, because then you lose a guy. Mark asks, and this is a good one for you, Anthony, is it time to break up 97-36? Krill plays differently when he spent too much time on a line with Zuccarello. It's hard with Boldy out, right?
With Boldy, Eriksson Ek, Johansson out. Who else is going to play there?
Yeah.
I mean, right now, they tried to reunite the Russian line with Trenyan, Yurov, and Tarasenko, and they were good, didn't have the same quick chemistry that they had when they were first put together. But right now, with the guys that are out, I don't know what else you do with your lineup. I just don't see another fit somewhere else.
Yeah, I agree with you. Nate asks, is Kaprizov dealing with an injury while he's racking up assists? Seems so prone to turnovers lately and hasn't been controlling games the same way. We've talked a lot about him here. I don't want to assume injury, but I will say all these guys are dealing with something right now. Like groins right now are prevalent in this league. Core stuff. There's one big player on the Wild that I know is dealing with something that's playing through it. Turnovers has always been part of his game, but especially when he's going through goal scoring drought, it seems like he gets a little antsy, Anthony.
Yeah, a little bit. I don't know. I think there are
a lot of hope plays with his passes lately.
There have been, and that when their game gets off, sometimes that's what you see. Yep. And I do think what's interesting about this Wild club, and you made mention of the number of guys going to the Olympics, is that everybody in the league is dealing with injuries right now, and there's half of the Wild roster is going to the Olympics. Think about that. I mean, 9 guys. Well, now with Brodin out, maybe 8, but
unless JoJo
becomes an extra. Yeah. I mean, but you're talking about almost half of a roster that could all benefit from a few weeks off. And not that I'd ever say, like, hey, these guys shouldn't go. They should go. This is the honor. The players fought for this. They want to go. But it is interesting when you think about that. You've got some of these other teams, like you just mentioned, Montreal, where their best 2 guys would love to be going and aren't. And instead, they're going to get 3 weeks of rest.
Yeah. Jason Robertson, too, by the way, who the Wild are going to have to play in the first round. Steve Hogan asks, this is a good one for you, Anthony, because I've actually kind of witnessed this, too, but a lot of it, again, is based on the fact that the Wild have injuries, so you're not always going to play them with the greatest players. But Steve Hogan asks, I remember hearing a stat about how often Cale Makar gets paired with Nathan MacKinnon's line. It seems like we do not match Hughes and Faber with Kaprizov as often. What do the numbers say? Do you know that?
Well, I didn't look at it after this trip, but prior to the trip, we had looked at it, and it was almost the same, actually. Okay. It was, I can't remember which way I did it with MacKinnon Makar. I think it was 60% of McKinnon's ice time was with Makar, or 68% or something like that. I think it went that way. And Kaprizov's with Hughes was like low 60s, so it was close. And in both cases, obviously, the defenseman plays more minutes than the forward. So I did it forward to defense was the way I compared it. And there isn't a way to search it to see like where that ranks in the league. You'd have to just manually go through and look at each guy that you think might be high. But
good thing you're off today to do that research.
Right, yeah, I've got time for that. But I did look it up, and in fact, it was, I think I've said many times, the number of things that end up on my list of graphics each night are in the show because Wes Walls or Ryan Carter will just have hey, I was wondering about this, and then I'll dive in and do the research. And that was one that Wes had brought up. It was shortly after we had played Colorado. So I did look at those two, and I looked at a few other combos that weren't anywhere close, but it isn't that far. It isn't that different.
Couple more. Lucas says, is Brody in a trade chip this summer? Love the guy, but he can't stay healthy, and you can use his salary to potentially fill other gaps. I do think so. I think they would consider that because I know that they're starting to get frustrated as well. You and I have talked about this the last 2 or 3 years. As good as he is, you just can't have a defenseman that plays 50, 60 games a year.
Yeah. And it's been his number's been bigger than that. I think hasn't he missed 15 each of the last couple of years. This year sounds like he's going to miss more, which is too bad because especially now,
basically the last 4 years.
Yeah. And especially now with the addition of Hughes, it's allowed he and Spurgeon to just play together, and which I think when those two guys are together, they're special. They're among the best shutdown pair in the league. But he's last 4 or 5 years, he's averaged about 62 games. It looks, if I do the math quickly in my head. So an average of probably 64 over the last 4 seasons. Yeah. So you get a guy who's missing 18 games a year. That's a lot.
Yeah, it is. Russo Slacks asks actually a serious question for the first time in his life. Perhaps an unpopular take, but I do not care for the NHL players being in the Olympics and Four Nations, regardless of how entertaining the tournaments are and can be. It's likely impossible for the Olympics, but couldn't the Four Nations or in future World Cups take place in the offseason instead? That's been discussed. I think the big thing is that they feel that during spring training and no football, they really have the exclusive ability to control the sports at that time. If you have the World Cup every 2 years, when in non-Olympic years. The other thing is I don't think these players in their off seasons, it's short enough that they want to, risk injury before the year and also, train to the point to have to go play internationally.
Well, two things. Number one is, yes, they have the eyes of the sports fan, but you could argue that the NHL is giving that away in a 3-week span where they would have all the eyes of the sports fans because Super Bowl's over and spring training hasn't started. It's a tough time. And that's why I've always said this isn't a no-brainer for the teams to just say, hey, yeah, let's let our guys go. We're giving away 3 weeks of the least competition we have for sports viewership and risking injury with all of our players in the middle of our season, disrupting all of it. They did try it, remember, a few years ago with that tournament in like September, and when they had the tournament that had the Team Europe and the Team America and the 6 teams, I think, were in it. And that was so disruptive for training camp because those guys had to come in 2 weeks early to get themselves ready to go play in that tournament. So they've tried it. I don't think there's a great solution. It's just the reality is that the Olympics take place, and part of the Olympics is not just a World Cup of hockey. It's the entire Olympic experience. So I just don't think it's a no-brainer to say that the players should be allowed to go play. I understand the league's hesitation and the fact that it had to be negotiated. It'll be fun to watch, but I just don't think it's as cut and dry, black and white as it might appear.
Last question of the show. I did get a lot of Panarin questions. We reported the other day, and I'm hearing it's true that the Wild are not interested in Panarin for myriad reasons. But it's just, I don't think that is something that's in the works unless something significantly changed. I think one big reason is just the fact is history in the playoffs isn't very good. So I just don't see it. This is my favorite question of the thing. Walter asks, how do I get LaPanta's voice to read me Russo's athletic pieces on my phone? And if you have an iPhone, I know it's different with an Android, but if you have an iPhone, we have that function in the top right. There's an ear there. If you hit it, it does, like, essentially Siri could read you my full article. And I know that I write long, so this is a good little, this is now your excuse if you're a reader
to never ever miss one of my articles because you could have it read to you. But is there a way that you would do the voiceovers?
Yeah. What's the guy's name? Walter?
Walter.
Okay. So Walter, if you send me your Athletic password so that I can get in and see the articles, then I can read them. And
you can send voice memos to people. This could be like this could be like this could be $1 million idea. Instead of Cameo, you do just voiceovers. Like, yeah.
Yep. What do you charge for Athletic subscriptions?
I think like $2 a month.
$2 a month. So I could, if I added $1 a month for people that want to read it.
You could also bundle it with the New York Times and you get all the games, like all the New York Times games.
Well, that would have some value to me.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, we'll work on it, Walter. We'll see if we can get it done.
Thanks, everybody, for joining again Monday night, January 26th, 7 p.m. at Elsie's is our next live show. We might stay tuned in February. Maybe Anthony will do a show with a guest co-host. Thanks to our incredible sponsors and for joining us in the Aquarius Home Services studio. Aquarius Home Services, your local authorized dealer for Connecticut water treatment systems and Onyx maps. Talk to you next week, everybody.
So much coming, there's nothing